final days of World War II, as the Third Reich teetered on the brink of collapse, one of the strangest and most unexpected battles of the conflict took place. It occurred not between two armies of soldiers, but between former enemies, prisoners, and the remnants of Nazi loyalists. This is the story of the Battle of Castle Itter, a battle fought at the very end of the war on May 5, 1945, just days after Adolf Hitler's suicide, and only 2 days before Germany's unconditional surrender. Located in the Tyrolean Alps of Austria, Schloss Itter was originally a medieval fortress dating back to the 13th century. Though it had fallen into ruin over the centuries, the castle was rebuilt in the 19th century, becoming a symbol of opulence. After Austria's annexation by Nazi Germany in 1938, the SS seized the castle under Heinrich Himmler's orders and repurposed it as a high-security prison for prominent French prisoners. By 1943, it was incorporated into the Dachau concentration camp system and transformed into a prison for high-profile figures, including French politicians and generals such as Edouard Daladier, Paul Reynaud, Maurice Gamelin, Michel Clemenceau, Charles de Gaulle's sister, Marie-Agnes de Gaulle, and tennis star Jean Brotra. As the war drew to a close, Schloss Itter had become a new symbol not just of Nazi oppression, but also of the bizarre alliances and chaos that marked the final days of the Third Reich. By the spring of 1945, the castle was under the control of Nazi forces, but the advancing Allied armies were closing in on Austria. The prisoners held there were living in a fragile state of uncertainty, waiting for either liberation or the inevitable chaos of defeat. However, there was another group often overlooked in the story of Castle Itter, the Austrian resistance, and with the Allies so close, they were able to finally take action. The Austrian resistance played a crucial role, providing valuable intelligence on German defenses and guiding Allied forces through the Inn-River Valley. Their primary goal was to protect Austrian civilians from the brutal reprisals of the SS. As the war neared its end, people were hanging white and Austrian flags from their windows in a show of defiance. But the SS showed no mercy, opening fire on those they labeled as defeatists. The atmosphere inside Castle Itter was tense, with the French prisoners fearing that the SS guards would execute them. But on May 4th, the castle situation took a sudden turn. After the last commander of Dachau shot himself, the SS officer in charge of the castle vanished soon after, and the fortress was left eerily deserted. Renaud and Clemenceau ventured out of the castle gates, hoping to find safety in the Itter village, but they quickly turned back as the roads were still filled with roaming SS patrols setting up roadblocks and machine gun nests. Returning to the castle, the French VIPs, very important prisoners, held a meeting. It was clear that they were still in danger, and with the SS nowhere to be seen, they feared it wouldn't be long before their captors remembered they were there, so they knew they had to act fast. Their first step was to make a French tricolor flag, hoping it would signal to any Allied aircraft that they were still alive. Next, they sought an unlikely ally from the Austrian underground resistance, SS Captain Kurt Siegfried Schrader, a decorated officer who had once served as a bodyguard at Hitler's headquarters. Schrader had defected to the resistance after being wounded in France. Though he agreed to help, he warned that his rank and influence would only buy them a little time. If the higher-ups in the Nazi command decided to wipe them out, his position would not be enough to stop it. It became clear that the only thing that could save them now was the swift arrival of American forces. They sent a Czech cook by the name of Andreas Krobot to make contact with the Allies, but halfway to the American lines near the town of Orgel, he almost fell into the hands of a German patrol. His life was saved when he was pulled inside a nearby house by an unexpected rescuer, Major Joseph Gangl. A career soldier in the Wehrmacht, Gangl had fought through some of the war's most brutal battles, such as Stalingrad, Normandy, and Bastogne. But, like many others, he had returned from the front lines a disillusioned man. In a decisive break from his oath, Gangl, much like Schrader, turned his back on the Nazis and joined the resistance. How these decorated soldiers gained the trust of the resistance remains unclear, but it hardly mattered. What mattered was that Gangl, along with a Czech cook, was now determined to lead the way to the American forces. They drove a few miles cross-country and soon found several Sherman tanks parked in a small village. Gangl stopped his vehicle and quickly stepped out with his hands raised. He was escorted to the nearest U.S. officer, a Lieutenant John Carey Lee. After hearing their story, Lee contacted headquarters, and following a brief conversation, he decided he and his men were going on a rescue mission. Lee's unit was part of the 12th Armored Division, whose men weren't eager to risk their lives battling stubborn Nazis now that the war was practically over for them. But Lee was determined, and he set off with a makeshift task force of 7 Shermans, leading the charge in his own tank, the Besotten Jenny. When they reached the next river, only 4 of the tanks managed to cross a wooden bridge before it collapsed. With their numbers dwindling, the column pressed on. Upon reaching Vorgel, they were warmly greeted by the Austrian resistance and joined by a group of German soldiers loyal to Gangl. Though the Waffen-SS had already pulled out of Vorgel, Lee left 2 of his tanks behind to support the resistance in case they returned. With just 2 Shermans remaining, Besotten Jenny and Boschbuster, they continued on with the Germans in tow. As they neared the village of Itter, they encountered another bridge, this one rigged with explosives. Lee ordered Boschbuster to stay behind and guard their retreat route. With no further issues, Besotten Jenny and a dozen American and German soldiers made their way to the castle gates. As they entered, Lee ordered his tank to turn around and block the entrance. When Lee and his team arrived at the castle, the prisoners greeted them with relief. But their hope quickly turned to disappointment when they saw the small size of the rescuing force. So now, one of the most unlikeliest scenes of the war took place, where American soldiers, Wehrmacht deserters, and an SS officer joined forces to protect French prisoners in an Austrian castle from Nazi loyalists. Schrader observed several Waffen-SS trucks maneuvering through the area, hauling anti-tank guns. Aware that American reinforcements were en route, Captain Lee ordered the French prisoners to take refuge inside the castle's keep while the soldiers took up positions along the walls. Armed only with rifles and submachine guns, they would rely on the Besotten Jenny to make up for their lack of firepower. Lee soon went to bed in the castle quarters, but his rest would be brief. At 4 a.m., Lee was awoken by the sound of a German MG-42 tearing into the gatehouse, while Jenny's .50 caliber responded in kind. Tracer rounds streaked across the dark sky, painting the battlefield in brief flashes of light. On the western wall, the defenders spotted SS soldiers approaching with grappling hooks trying to breach the castle. So far, the enemy's efforts had been thwarted by the concentrated fire from the defenders. Gangl, Schrader, and the castle krauts kept the pressure up, firing from the upper floors, while the Americans held the gatehouse with whatever firepower they had left. The trust between the Germans and Americans had been fragile, built on necessity rather than camaraderie. But in that moment, with the SS closing in, it was clear to everyone if the Nazis broke in, none of them would make it out alive. Throughout the night, the defenders were constantly harassed by a reconnaissance force sent to gauge their strength and search for any weaknesses in the castle's defenses. The enemy's probing tactics kept the defenders on edge, always anticipating the next wave of attack. But before the main assault could fully begin, Major Gangl managed to get through on the phone to Aloy Mer, the Austrian resistance leader in Vorgel, and asked for reinforcements. Unfortunately, the resistance could only spare 2 more German soldiers and a teenage Austrian resistance fighter. At 0830, the defenders spotted a 20mm anti-aircraft cannon and an 88mm gun position to the northwest, with truckloads of Waffen-SS soldiers under Jörg Bachmann streaming into the area. The first shell from the 88mm slammed into the castle with a deafening crash, sending a shockwave through the walls. Almost immediately, a rapid succession of 20mm shells began tearing into the castle's defenses, punching small gaps into the stone. It was clear things were going from bad to worse. Meanwhile, Besotten Jenny lurched violently as it took hits. Flames shot from the engine access grills. All the occupants soon escaped just before a second shell sealed its fate. As their chances of survival dwindled, the French VIPs took up arms and joined the defenders at their gatehouse. The elderly Renault, who had served as France's prime minister at the war's beginning, fired an MP-40 with great enthusiasm but with little tactical sense through an open window, exposing himself. Gangl rushed to his side to get him to safety, but he barely made it a few steps before a sniper's bullet found its mark, and the soldier, who had seen the European part of the war from the beginning to its final battle, was killed. There was no time to mourn. The relentless pounding of 88mm shells continued, smashing into the castle walls, shaking their defenders to their core. The Waffen-SS soldiers, undeterred, were pushing up the slopes, pressing their attack with renewed intensity. Just as the main SS assault was about to launch, the telephone suddenly rang. It was Major Kramers of the 103rd Infantry Division, who who had just arrived with his small rescue force in Vorgl. Unable to reach Captain Lee over the radio, since the only working radio mounted in Besaten Jenny had been destroyed, Kramers used the town hall's telephone to make contact. Lee answered briefly.
"They're showing the bejeebers out of us. Listen, better get some dozier right away."
Before he could provide more details about the enemy's position or the dire situation, the line went dead, cutting him off mid-sentence. By the afternoon, the defenders inside the castle were running dangerously low on ammunition, and they knew the situation was becoming more desperate by the minute. Kramers, still unaware of the exact location or strength of the SS forces, might be walking straight into a trap. That's when Jean Barotra, the former tennis champion, bravely volunteered to cross through the SS lines to deliver vital intelligence to Kramers. Dressed in simple peasant's clothes, Barotra scaled the castle's 15-foot wall and made his way into the woods, moving swiftly and cautiously to sneak past groups of SS soldiers, each step carrying immense risk. At one point, he walked straight into the two Germans manning a machine gun. Knowing that any act of fear would give him away, he pretended to be a forager and waved to the dumbstruck Germans, and then pretended to urinate next to a nearby tree and walked away unmolested. Inside the castle, the situation was becoming desperate as the defenders were on the verge of running out of ammunition. Lee began making plans to withdraw everyone into the keep and make a last stand, preparing to hold each staircase landing with bayonets and fists. Then, just after 4 p.m., as a group of Waffen-SS soldiers prepared to blow the front gate with an anti-tank rocket, help finally arrived. Barotra had successfully reached Kramers' force, and a war reporter, recognizing Barotra as a tennis legend, immediately alerted Kramers. The Frenchman briefed him on the situation and asked for an American uniform so he could fight alongside them. Kramers' reinforcements, bolstered by Boschbuster and reconnaissance elements from the nearby 142nd Infantry Regiment, charged up the hill, scattering the SS troops with heavy fire. The attackers, caught off guard, fled into the forest, but around 100 of them were recaptured in the aftermath of the battle. The prisoners were safe, rescued by an unlikely coalition of Americans and Germans. The defenders suffered only 1 soldier killed and 4 wounded. For his leadership in the defense of Castle Itter, Lee was promoted to captain and awarded the Distinguished Service Cross. Kurt Siegfried Schrader was arrested and charged by U.S. forces after the war for his past affiliation with the Nazis and initially sentenced to 2 years in prison, but was shortened in recognition of his actions at Castle Itter. Major Joseph Gangl became a national hero in Austria for his courageous actions during the defense of Castle Itter, and a street in Vorgl was named after him. The Battle of Castle Itter remains one of the strangest and most improbable moments of World War II. In a desperate stand against the SS, Americans, Germans, and French prisoners joined forces to defend the castle. The defense of Castle Itter shows that even people considered to be enemies can come together to achieve the extraordinary.